Hi, everyone. I just want to welcome you to this talk today. And before we get started, we're just going to wait for a few moments for everyone to kind of trickle in. So just sit back and enjoy the time with us until we officially start the broadcast. Thank you, everyone.
I think you're on mute, Damon. Sorry.
Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today. However, before we start, I want to acknowledge that we gathered today virtually close to the merging of two rivers on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot and peoples of Treaty 7, including Siksiga, Pigani, Kainai, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda First Nations, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nation. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Once again, thank you for joining us today as we spend the next hour with our knowledgeable guest speaker, Pascal Rowe. Pascal brings 5+ years of recruitment and selection experience across energy, agriculture, and engineering systems and integration and software businesses. He has hired and negotiated job offers with hundreds of candidates, ranging from interns and new graduates up to VP level positions across all teams and departments in these businesses. Currently, Pascal leads recruitment and employer branding at a remote tech startup based in Palo Alto, California, called Hi Hello, which builds the world leading digital business card and contact management software solution for individuals and organizations. I'm incredibly excited to have Pascal here with us today. My name is Damon Bailey, and I am the Economic Development Community Animator at YW Calgary. YW Calgary is the largest and longest serving women's organization in Calgary. For more than a century, we have touched tens of thousands of lives and continually evolve our programming to meet the changing needs of women in the community. YW Calgary also continues to support and promote social change by partnering with donors, government, social service agencies, and communities to extend opportunities for women by providing supportive emergency and transitional housing, access to our crisis shelter, outreach, and counseling for those who experience abuse, as well as for perpetrators. YW Calgary is committed to women's economic prosperity, to empower women to pursue their ambitions and participate equally and meaningfully at all levels of economic decision making, to ensure she has what she needs to make the choices she wants. As part of the Women's Economic Prosperity team, my role is to engage the public about topics that promote economic prosperity for women. Together, Pascal and I hope this session today will empower you within your professional life as well as your personal. If time permits, there will be a Q&A period at the end of Pascal's presentation, and I encourage everyone to pose any questions they may have on the screen provided. At this time, without further ado, Pascal, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much again, Damon, and to the YW Calgary team for having me today. Hello to everyone out there in the audience. Really appreciate you all having me. So today I'm here to chat with you about negotiation and how you can hopefully learn to negotiate job offers a little bit more effectively. And we'll talk about kind of some of the wage gaps and systemic issues that exist in the business world today, and how hopefully you'll all be able to overcome some of those things as well. So my title here is a little bit different than what the team at the YW had put together, but essentially covering the same topic, of course. My name is Pascal Theriault, so really excited to be here today. We could go to the next slide, please. Excellent. So I just wanted to spend a minute kind of talking about who I am, I guess, and why I'm hopefully qualified to speak on this subject of negotiation in general. Damon did a wonderful job of introducing me. I'll just provide a little bit more information. So as she mentioned, my name is Pascal. I'm currently kind of a lead recruiter with Hi Hello, which is a remote software technology startup based in California. But I live and work here remotely from Calgary, Alberta as well. And I used to work for a Canadian HR software company called Avanti just prior to this. I also own my own small consulting company on the side, through which I do some recruitment consulting with local Calgarian businesses and businesses across Canada. I speak at events such as this one, both virtually and in person. And I also offer some occasional career coaching and kind of job search advisory services on the side as well. So anyways, I am a graduate from the University of Calgary's Haskayne School of Business. I also attended Copenhagen Business School in Copenhagen, Denmark, on an exchange when I was in university, where I studied a specialized course in cross-cultural negotiation there. And I also was fortunate to live and study with a very diverse and just intelligent set of international students from around the world there. I do have 5+ years of recruiting experience or talent acquisition experience across a very diverse set of industries, as Damon touched on as well, and a very diverse set of roles from interns and new graduates all the way to VP level executives, essentially across all functions of these different businesses. And on the slide here, you can see some of the different logos of different organizations that I've worked with and represented in the past or currently as well. So throughout my career, I would say that I've engaged with and spoken with over 7,500 candidates over the last 5 years, really understanding the positives and negatives of their searches, their interview processes, their job negotiations. And I personally have directly negotiated over 150 job offers with candidates kind of as the face and voice of my employer on the employer side of the table, as well as an additional probably 20 to 25 vendor and recruitment agency contract agreements over the course of my career as well, ranging in value from a few $100s to kind of multiple thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars. I also have over 7,000 LinkedIn followers and growing, hopefully, so I share short form blog posts and content nearly daily to help job seekers become more informed and better equipped in their searches, interviews, and job offer negotiation processes. And I actually just wrote my first long form blog post for my current organization, Hi Hello. And it's really interesting that we're talking about negotiation today, because that was actually the subject of the long form blog post that I wrote as well. And then finally, I'm just a huge advocate for diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging in the workplace and in recruitment processes. I feel that this has been represented through my LinkedIn content. With my past organization, Avanti, I was also a part of a YouTube broadcast and a blog post titled Hiring Without Bias that also talked about some of these similar subjects. I've attended various conferences and webinars around diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and over the course of my career have also built and maintained partnerships with many organizations such as Chic Geek, which promotes opportunities for women in the tech sector, the Calgary Immigrant Women's Association, Talent Minded Women in Tech Sales boot camps, and now, of course, the YWCA as well. So I'm just very passionate about trying to create an inclusive and diverse and really level playing field for all candidates, regardless of background in my work. So just quickly running through today's agenda, I'll touch on a little bit about negotiations, just kind of defining what negotiations are, what some key negotiation skills are, and successful negotiation outcomes. I'll talk about the state of negotiations, showing some different research, stats, and trends from industry, as well as a couple of anecdotal kind of stories from my experience. And then we'll finish off with kind of 5 key negotiation skills to learn to help you take your negotiation level or game to the next level and really achieve kind of the outcomes that are equitable and the value that you deserve for yourself in your career. And then, of course, as Damon mentioned, we'll hopefully have some time for Q&A towards the end as well. Excellent. So before we get into the bread and butter of today's discussion, I think it's important to first define exactly what negotiations are. So negotiations really are a type of conversation that are used to bridge the gap between often conflicting wants and needs of 2 or more parties. So there's really a process of give and take where each side must make some sort of concession to benefit the other, or ideally for everyone involved. So therefore, there are several key soft skills and approaches that play an important role in negotiating effectively. So speaking of those skills and approaches, I think it's also important to discuss what these skills are in this context. So negotiation skills are the qualities and approaches that allow those 2 or more parties involved in that discussion to work together to reach an agreeable solution for all involved. Sorry, could you just go back to the last slide? Thank you. So these skills really depend on the skills and approaches of your counterpart in the negotiation as well, the negotiation environment and your desired result. But they really boil down to kind of the in-demand soft skills like effective communication, active listening, planning, preparation, persuasion, strategic thinking, cooperation. So grasping and mastering these skills really leads to a higher chance of successful negotiating outcomes, regardless of someone's background or starting position. We can move to the next one. Thanks. Excellent. So And then I think lastly, it's also important to define what success in a negotiation is. So a successful negotiation, as you see here on the slide, is really when the two or more parties are able to openly discuss that issue or a set of topics or issues and land on a mutually agreeable solution. So ideally, both parties should behave in a professional and courteous manner. Effective negotiations help us build strong relationships. They help us to deliver long-lasting solutions and avoid future conflicts related to that relationship or to those specific issues. And these kind of the best or most successful negotiations often arise when you can make concessions that are kind of little or lesser value to you while giving up something of higher value to the other party. So it's really, really important to keep this in mind. And it's important to note that in a successful negotiation, neither side is likely to achieve the exact ideal end result that they're looking for at the beginning of the discussion. If that were the case, it would really be a one-sided negotiation as opposed to a win-win or mutually agreeable solution. So it's important to kind of have that in mind, I think, when you're entering negotiations, but at the same time, of course, always strive for what you're hoping for, or at least have kind of a number or an area that you're not willing to walk away with less. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So we can move on to the next slide. So really getting into kind of what the state of the industry or the business world is, the state of negotiations in practice, is especially in the business world, is that although things are improving and have been improving for some time, slowly but surely, the reality is that the business world and people in general in today's society are still riddled with different cognitive and unconscious biases, and just organizations are riddled with systemic inequities, which is really unfortunate. So part of this, in my opinion, is due to the fact that many current business leaders and executives, or kind of the decision makers in most corporate negotiations and hiring decisions, are still from older generations or have generally come from a generation where they might have been raised or instilled with more unconscious biases than younger generations like millennials or Generation Z, for example. Part of this is also due to a lack of investment or serious support for diversity and inclusion focused professionals, recruiters, HR folks, and equitable hiring leaders who are trying their best to drive change in these organizations and industries. But oftentimes the reality is that a lot of these folks that are trying to drive this change and meaning well are still not yet always in kind of the top decision-making position, or receiving pushback sometimes from some of those folks at the top. So as a generalization, this is a sad reality, is that most of the top business leaders care more about the dollars and cents in their organizations and saving costs and things like that, rather than sometimes always being human, fair, and empathetic and equitable to their people or their employees. Although, again, I do believe this is changing. I think there are definitely many business leaders and organizations out there that are doing the right things and that are acting in an equitable way. But just on the whole, as a generalization, I think there's a lot of room to grow and change in the industry. And then thirdly, I would say that the last part of this problem is, I think there's also a simple lack of knowledge and education. I want to note, it's not a lack of skill or ability, but just a simple lack of knowledge and education around how to negotiate for many different groups. And notably, there's 3 different groups that kind of come to mind that research in the next couple of slides that I'll talk about shows that have sometimes a little bit less, success in negotiations. And those are unfortunately women, underrepresented groups or minorities, and then really youth or inexperienced professionals that are beginning their careers. So all of that said, I just want to explicitly call out that business leaders and organizations definitely need to do a much better job of promoting safe spaces for equitable and fair negotiations in their organizations, whether it's about salaries when someone's joining the team or pay increases, whatever it may be, and also need to do a better job of checking their own biases, being aware of their own cognitive or unconscious biases to be able to reduce discrimination and inequity in their organization, as you'll see again represented in the data on the next couple of slides. So we can move forward here to the next one. So just on this slide, I just wanted to share some interesting pieces of information that I've come across in my research and preparing for this presentation, but just also throughout my career. So the first piece on the left side is it's a sad reality that the gender gap in negotiation and in salary, it does very clearly still exist. So this is obviously not something that I want to see or that anyone wants to see, but it is something that is still present in today's world. So the Institute for Women's Policy Research, in partnership with Harvard Law, did a study last year in 2021 and found that in the United States, which I think is a fairly comparable market to Canada, women only earned basically 83 cents on the dollar for each dollar that men earned across the country. And to add to that, it becomes, there's even more disparity for women of color or women of different minorities as well, which is really unfortunate. So Hispanic women, for example, earned just 58.4% of men's earnings, Black women 63.1%, and white women on the whole roughly 80% of men's earnings. So there's definitely a lot of work and change that needs to happen there. But I just want to kind of set the tone as I know that a part of this discussion is really addressing the gender pay gap and whether it is indeed real in the workplace. And sadly, still today it is. So just wanted to kind of start with that. The second piece is really kind of interesting as well. There's a study from Randstad, which is a leading recruitment agency and consulting firm in North America, that shows that roughly 60% of women say they have never, ever negotiated with an employer over their pay, whether that's their starting salary when they're taking a new offer, or maybe they're receiving a promotion, or just asking for a pay raise. So only roughly 40% of women say that they have done that throughout their careers, versus 60%, more than the majority, that say that they haven't. And that what that leads to is really more inequity, and leads to part of that gender pay gap. And it also leads to women being more frequent than men to leave employers to try and get a salary bump elsewhere as well. So there are over 72% of women say that they have or would strongly consider leaving their current employer to get a salary bump elsewhere, rather than engaging in that negotiation with their current employer. And this was a survey that included over 1,200 adult women across the US. And really what it shows is that men are much more likely to kind of engage in those negotiations with those organizations, with their current organization, to try and have upward mobility there in responsibility and in title and in pay, whereas women are much less likely to do so within that same organization, and would rather try and go for a completely new job or a completely new organization or opportunity in order to get a little bit of a higher bump. And then on the right side there, you see that Harvard Business Review conducted a study as well a few years ago that showed that men are as much as 4 times more likely than women to ask for really what they want. It's I'm just looking through my notes here, but women often unfortunately don't get what they want and deserve, because again, based on those two kind of bubbles on the right side, women are just statistically much more likely to ask for what they want. So there are actually 3 separate studies that were involved in this report that kind of showed this. So the first was a study that was comparing the salaries of male MBA graduates who had graduated from Ivy League schools in the US to female. And they were asking for roughly $4,000 or almost 8% higher salary to begin with than women. And this was a study that everything was kind of equal to begin with. They were given sort of the same job, the same sort of education, the same type of experience, and women were asking for, again, roughly 8% less than men on average. And in fact, only 7% of the women involved in that study actually tried to negotiate for their salary. The rest just basically accepted the offer that they were given in that simulation or in that study. And in this particular case, actually, there were almost 60% of men who tried to negotiate their salary. And in that case, that was 8 times more men than women that actually tried to negotiate. So it's really interesting in that sense. A second study that was involved in this piece was testing kind of the gender difference in a lab. So subjects were told that they would be observed playing a word game and that they would be paid between $3 and $10 for playing the game. And then after each subject completed the task, basically one of the studiers or experimenters thanked them for their time and effort, and said, "Here's $3. Is $3 okay with you?" Which is, of course, at the bare minimum of that $3 to $10 range that they had shown. And the outstanding result was that for nearly all of the men, the $3 was not okay, and they said so about it. That being said, their requests in that particular study for more money or to try and get closer to that $10 exceeded the women's by 9 to 1. So we're talking at least 4 times, 8 times, 9 times. So what you can see here is that, again, statistically, women are just much less likely to engage in negotiations and ask for what they want. And I do think a lot of that is just due to kind of societal norms that are probably no longer correct and have never really been correct, that have kind of been put into place over many years, and just, again, that lack of education and knowledge for negotiation, or when and how to negotiate for women and underrepresented groups as well. And then the third and final study that was involved in this piece was the largest of the 3, and there were several hundred people surveyed online over the internet, and they were asked about the most recent negotiations they had attempted or initiated, and when they'd expect to negotiate next in their life. And this was just talking about anything in life, not necessarily a salary or a job negotiation or anything like that. And the study showed that men place themselves in negotiation situations much more often than women do, and regard more of their interactions as potential negotiation situations. So I don't have the exact data, because that study was quite comprehensive, but essentially, off the top of my head, I think men were basically saying they had negotiated again 4 times basically 4 times more recently to one time, basically, when women had said they had actively negotiated in the recent past, or were expecting to negotiate in the recent future. So these are just some interesting statistics of really how things work in practice and industry, but also in some of these studies as well. So we can move forward to the next slide. So I do have some more data here, and this is where we get into sort of the combination of kind of when gender and ethnicity or race kind of intersect as well, which unfortunately makes things even more disparate in this particular case. So there's a study from the University of Virginia that was completed a few years ago as well, where the kind of lead researcher had assigned an equal number of female and male working adults of different races to the study, as well as a group of female undergraduate students of different races to play kind of a simulation of a job candidate and or hiring evaluator in a short simulation of a negotiated job offer. Everyone was given an initial salary range of $82,000 to $90,000. But what ended up happening was that the female candidates, and then the female candidates who were also Black or from African American descent, even though some of them tried to negotiate their salaries, the evaluators scored high for racial bias and just for bias in general against females who tried to negotiate, and especially so against Black females who tried to negotiate. So there is sort of a false perception, or there was a false perception, likely biased the evaluators' expectation that Black candidates would or should potentially settle for less, again, which I completely do not agree with, but it's related to some of the unconscious biases out there in the world. And this led people of all different races that were on the evaluator side and both genders to penalize Black female candidates for negotiating and granting fewer salaries concessions in those negotiations. So each time that one of those candidates was perceived to have made an offer or a counter offer, the evaluators who were high on the racial bias side of things gave those people on average $300 to $500 less in starting salary. Whereas by contrast, the evaluators who scored lower on the racial bias side had more accurate perceptions of the candidate's negotiating skill and frequency, and therefore granted more equitable salaries as a result. So this just goes to show that, unfortunately, there are people on kind of the control side of the table or the employer side of the table that whether, again, they know it or not, or they think it or not, they do have implicit or unconscious biases against women negotiating due to what they believe to be appropriate societal norms and against people of color negotiating as well. And of course, again, the issue kind of gets worse and worse as you kind of intersect or combine some of these different factors. In the second piece here in the middle, the Pew Research Center, which is a pretty important research center that's part of the Harvard School actually as well in the United States, showed that Hispanic women earned only roughly 62% of white men's wages in 2016, which is fairly similar to the number on the last slide that I shared as well. I think it was in the high 50s or low 60s. So really, it's quite difficult to see these kinds of numbers, but what it shows is that when women negotiate for higher salaries, they're almost behaving in contrary to deeply ingrained societal gender roles for women, which is over the course of many years have been sometimes viewed as more passive, more helpful and caring, more accommodating than men. So as a result, the act of negotiating or asking for more can sometimes lead to backlash or to the person on the other side of the table being less likely to come and meet you halfway. Relative to men who often ask for more, women are penalized financially and considered kind of more abrasive or less likable in these types of negotiations, which is definitely not the case and should not be the case. But it is unfortunately a sad reality of the world still today. And again, just speaking about the facts here, gender is only one aspect of the pay gap. Again, we can look at even college-educated Black men earned only about 80% of the hourly wages of college-educated white men in the study in 2016. Black men in general earned only 68% of what white men did, regardless of their educational background. And again, the number there on the slide, only 62% of, or Hispanic women, sorry, earned only 62% of wages of white men. And then finally, on the far right there, this is a study by Advance by UC Davis, which is a very kind of high-end school in Southern California. Women are generally much more pessimistic about how much is available when they do negotiate. And so they typically ask for and therefore get less when they do negotiate than men on average. And in this particular study, it showed that women ask for roughly 30% or as much as 30% less than men on average, which in that previous study that I mentioned, the number was only, I think, about 8% less. But again, 8%, 30%, the facts show that women unfortunately ask for less on average than men when they do enter negotiations. And in surveys related to this study, 2.5 times more women than men said they feel a great deal of apprehension about negotiating. And this was kind of an interesting anecdote that I saw in this study as well. Women, when asked to kind of compare the act of negotiating to something in their day-to-day life, women compare negotiating to going to the dentist, and it's a pretty kind of undesirable experience and someone playing around in your mouth and that kind of thing. Whereas men often compare it to winning a baseball game or doing well in a wrestling match, something that's much more positive and sort of aggressive in nature in general. So I thought that was sort of interesting as an anecdote. And the last thing I wanted to mention before we move on to the next slide is that just kind of a story or an anecdote from my previous experience working with Avanti Software. So I was very fortunate there to have a leader. Her name is Angie, that was featured with me on that Hiring Without Bias YouTube video and podcast series. And her and I were very, very aligned on the importance of reducing bias in interview processes and in negotiations. So because of that, because both of us had that in mind, we did quite a bit of work of tracking the outcomes of different negotiations for job offers with candidates. Unfortunately, because I'm no longer an employee of Avanti, I don't have access to that data. But at a high level, anecdotally, there were a lesser portion of females over the course of 2 years that I worked there. There were a lesser portion of females that negotiated with us about their job offers. It wasn't as drastic of a difference as some of these numbers here that I've shown in the last couple of slides. And I think a part of that was due to the fact that we tried to make a really comfortable and equitable environment, and we always came out first and shared our salary ranges there with Avanti openly. We always told candidates, regardless of gender, ethnicity, or background, that we always welcome and encourage discussion and negotiation around job offers. So we're really trying to make it a much more comfortable and kind of two-sided experience in that sense. So I do think that was a part of the reason why the numbers were not quite so drastic as what we've seen in these last couple of slides, but still there. I would say off the top of my head, I think there were probably roughly 5 to 10% less women that tried to negotiate their salaries with us than men in general with Avanti. And we hired over 120 people over the course of 2 years. So as you can imagine, that does have an impact over the course of time, not only on that person's starting salary, but on their future career earnings and career growth and things like that as well. So anyways, we can move on to the next slide now. I guess I just wanted to pause for a moment before we continue and really ask the audience, like, whether this data and these anecdotes that I've just shared resonate with you and your experiences so far. I'd love to kind of see in the chat if this sounds, especially the pieces about like the apprehension to negotiate or not feeling comfortable to negotiate or not knowing what to ask for, those kinds of things. Like I was just curious from the audience if some of those pieces kind of resonate or stick with you or you have felt some of those things in the past. Awesome. So I see Damon has said that resonates with her. Michaela, as well, as a young professional, was terrified the first time she was asked for salary expectations. So it sounds like it does resonate with a couple of people in the audience. So it's really a sad reality. I of course didn't mean to be too depressing or bring anyone down too much with this data, but it really, I think, is eye-opening for myself and for really anyone who looks into and researches this data, just how much work there is to do to make a more equitable playing field for everyone out there. So anyways, as I mentioned earlier, there's a ton of work that needs to be done, obviously, on the employer side, on the business leader side, to create these more equitable and safe spaces for negotiations, to be just transparent and equitable upfront about salary ranges and pay equity within their organizations for people at the same role level and same title and roughly level of experience and things like that, regardless of their background or gender, or ethnicity, whatever it may be. So there's a ton of work on that side. But that being said, there are also some things that you can all do, or really that anybody can do as an individual to help overcome this data and really be on the positive side of things. And really that the way you can do that is by honing your five, what I kind of coined the 5 basic skills of negotiation. And before we move on to the next slide, I just want everyone to take a quick look at the note or the tip on the right hand side. this isn't necessarily included in the 5 tips, but I would say this is the foundation, because in order to use the 5 tips, you always need to, or the 5 skills, you always need to negotiate. It may not seem comfortable or natural at first, to Michaela's point, especially about her first time being asked about salary expectations or engaging in a negotiation. But like with anything in life or in work, practice will make perfect, and will help you to get much more comfortable and much more prepared to tackle these situations. And really, as you've seen by the data that I was showing, if you don't negotiate or if you don't ask for what you want, you're going to be much less likely, regardless of the situation, from a diversity and equity and inclusion perspective, to achieve what you want or what you deserve. So always, always, always try to negotiate. So we can move forward into the first tip here. So the number one skill or tip I think to equip yourself with is always do your homework. Before walking into any negotiation, it's really helpful and necessary to do that research, do your homework. You really need to understand the situation completely, have a clear sense of what's at stake for both sides, and run through all possible scenarios and outcomes. So make sure to do your research and think through all of your options before entering into the discussion. It's important to ask yourself some kind of thoughtful, introspective questions. Things like, what are your needs? Versus what are your wants? What kinds of pressures do you feel in entering in that negotiation? What other options do you have? And then you can also ask yourself the same questions from the perspective of the other party. And that's kind of a helpful role-playing exercise to understand really how they might be thinking about the situation, and then can give you some idea of how you might be able to respond or address some of the other parties' concerns or thoughts as well. So really, at the end of the day, the more information you have about yourself, the more information you have about your counterpart in negotiation, the more thought you've put into it before engaging in that discussion actively, the better are your chances for success. And in the context of a job offer negotiation, you can think of things like how much guaranteed base salary you need to support yourself and your family to be able to live comfortably with some savings and a little bit of disposable income. Think about what are your non-negotiables versus your nice to haves. How much do you value the base salary versus total compensation with a bonus or commission versus benefits and health insurance or vacation, flexible schedules, autonomy, all sorts of different things that are kind of at play that you might have a different weight for depending on your own needs and wants. What are the best and worst case scenarios that you can expect? Do you have any alternatives? Are you speaking with any other potential employers? Have you received any other offers? And lastly, just from a research standpoint, there are tons of sources out there online. You can use Glassdoor, LinkedIn, salary.com, PayScale. There's a site called levels.fyi. There's all sorts of information out there to kind of help arm yourself with recent and somewhat accurate information on compensation for your role and industry. And if you're able to kind of compile that data and have an idea of what's out there and what people are being paid for that role, for that level of experience, for your geography, for your industry, everything like that, that puts you in a much more kind of prepared and powerful position to enter the negotiation and have an idea of what you should ask for upfront as well. So moving on to the second slide, or the second piece of advice, and this sort of relates to always negotiating, but always make the first offer if you can as well. So believe it or not, making the first offer in a negotiation can drastically affect the negotiation to follow, as well as the outcome of that negotiation. So seizing control of the bargaining table and asking for what you want up front in a calm and non-confrontational way can really help you to steer the discussion towards your want and needs. So there's research out there that shows that however arbitrary it may seem, the first number or the first criteria, the first issue that's mentioned in a negotiation is hugely influential. So, for example, when the seller sets the opening offer in a negotiation, final prices tend to be higher. Well, if the buyer sets the opening offer, final prices tend to be lower. And this is shown in all kind of walks of life, whether it's in car sales or job offer negotiations or negotiating a contract with a vendor in your business, different things like that. And this tactic is really rooted in behavioral psychology, and specifically something known as the anchoring bias. So you see on my slide there, take advantage of the anchoring bias. And really what that means is, as it's written there, as humans, we naturally rely much too heavily on the first piece of information that we're ever presented with about a topic. So when we interpret newer information in the context, we then kind of interpret new information that we're provided in the context of that first anchor or that first piece of information that we've seen, instead of viewing it objectively like we sometimes should. So you should kind of be aware of this concept and really try to take advantage of it by making the first offer. And this one is pretty straightforward, of course, in the context of a job offer negotiation, but you should really always strive to make the first offer. And usually at some point in the interview process, to Michaela's comment earlier, you will likely be asked about your salary expectations or your total compensation expectations. So sometimes it's even in the first interview. Sometimes it's even when you're applying for a job online. So really, it's always important to set that number and set that stage at something that is at the very least what you are looking for, if not higher, because likely in the negotiation, that number is going to be dialed back a little bit. So really it's important to just be transparent, give them, again, that ideal target number or something even slightly higher, mention to them in that discussion in the interviews what the most important pieces of the total compensation package are to you and why, and reiterate the exact same information later on in the process if or when it comes to receiving and negotiating a formal offer, and especially reiterate that information if you feel the company lowballs you or gives you something that is completely different or out of the question based on what you had initially provided them with or asked them for. It's totally okay and fine for you to hold your ground and reiterate that initial information that you had previously told them or that you had previously given them as important to you. So moving on to the third tip here, in a negotiation and really any conversation, I think it's important to really ask good, thoughtful questions and listen carefully to the responses. This is a great way in a negotiation to arm yourself with more ammunition in that conversation. It rarely works in your favor when you're doing all the talking in a negotiation, or if you're just asking like really simple, direct yes or no questions or trying to lead the party to a specific response. That kind of thing usually doesn't work out well in a negotiation. But on the other hand, if you ask like really neutral, calm, sort of open-ended, curious questions, and you're comfortable with silence or comfortable with not hearing a response back for a little while, if it's over email or something like that, and you just actively wait and listen for those results. Sorry, I just see we're running out of time, so I'll try to speed through here. Anyways, if you do that, you really pressure the other party to respond, and that often leads them to divulging valuable information that can help your case in negotiation. So as a piece of advice, I would recommend spending roughly 2/3 of your time listening and only 1/3 of your time talking. Have that active listening, make the other party feel heard. It really builds trust and understanding in the discussion, and will likely lead them to reciprocate your excellent listening skills and the questions that you're asking them. So, and who knows, based on the information you find out or that the other party divulges, you might even rethink your original position or arrive at a better, more creative solution or alternative for both sides or both parties. So we'll move forward to the fourth one here, which is aiming for a win-win solution. I mentioned obviously earlier on in the presentation here, it's important not to aim for a one-sided solution. Always go for a win-win. So instead of thinking about what the other party can offer you or only what they can offer you, you should also always be thinking about what you can provide or offer to them. So remember, again, put yourself in their shoes, think about the situation from the other side's perspective. And if you help the other person feel satisfied, they will be much more inclined to help satisfy your needs as well. So rather than kind of a fixed pie, you can think about it as expanding. Rather than distributive, think about it as integrative. Negotiators who have that win-win mindset often open up new doors, discover new opportunities, come up with creative solutions where both sides can have their primary interests met. So in the context of a job offer negotiation, and this was a subject that Damon and her leader wanted me to touch on, job offer negotiations or pay raise negotiations are not just about salary. So there is so much more, so much else on the negotiation table. Even if your organization says no, we're not able to bump you up in base salary, or we don't have the budget to make that work today, there are so many other areas that you can consider, that you can try to negotiate on. So again, you can think about things like your vacation entitlement. Maybe you can bump that up from 2 weeks to 3 weeks, or 3 weeks to 4 weeks. Your level of benefits coverage. Is there a way that the employer can cover a slightly higher portion of the premiums, or are they able to provide a different package level that gives you more coverage for you and your family? Are they able to provide remote work opportunities or flexible hours or schedules for you? Potentially a different title, increased responsibility, a higher learning and development budget for the year. Maybe it's a start date, something as simple as having 2 weeks off to take a little break before you start your next job, or something like that. So there's so many different things at play in any negotiation. So it's really, really important to look at the bigger picture and understand what all of these different kind of moving pieces are, so that you can hopefully achieve that win-win solution. And then finally, the fifth tip or suggestion is always be patient and be willing to walk away. It might sound counterintuitive, but Rome wasn't built in a day. You really need to make sure you take your time and not rush when negotiating. Negotiations aren't easy, and they're not meant to be easy, and you'll likely face resistance at first. So it's essential not to give in or make those concessions too quickly. But if you remain patient, you hold firm in your goals, you are comfortable with that silence that we talked about, you then pressure the other party to concede, because they begin to believe that you aren't under the same pressure to come to an agreement or make a deal with them. So even if you don't have other alternatives, act like you do, because the other party doesn't know that. They don't need to know that. When you recognize and act like you have other alternatives, it really puts you in the driver's seat. It puts you in control. And this ties into something that's called BATNA. It's a negotiating concept, which stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So before you come into any negotiation, you should always have in mind what your BATNA is for that specific situation. So you need to always be willing to walk away, really, or to take a different deal, or take no deal at all. So in that case, again, you position yourself firmly in control. You can approach the situation with confidence, with patience. When you show that you aren't desperate, you have nothing to lose, and the other party will sense that you are staying strong and have resolve about the situation. So it's obviously best if you do legitimately have another job offer or several in hand, but you can always play it off like you do, even if you don't. Unless you're in an extremely desperate or dire situation to be able to support yourself or your family, don't ever accept an offer that falls below your BATNA number or criteria. If you have a low end salary, minimum weeks of vacation, and an expectation around your title, or like the relationship or personality of your manager or your team, don't put yourself in that environment, because at the end of the day, you deserve better and shouldn't settle for less. And if you make those concessions at the beginning and show that they can almost take advantage of you in that sense at the very beginning of a job offer relationship, then odds are that that person or that company or that employer are likely going to just continue to take advantage of you or lowball you and not give you what you're worth in the long run as well. So it's really the sad reality, but at the end of the day, they need you as an employee. You don't necessarily need them. Like, you have lots of options and again, I know it's easier said than done, but the reality is that there are tons of companies out there. There's tons of employers. There's tons of different organizations. There's tons of different managers. So it's always important to keep that in mind. Don't forget that. Be patient and be willing to walk away, and that will always put you in control. So I apologize again for running over time here, but thank you so much for your time and attention today. It's been wonderful chatting and sharing this information with you all. I really hope that this presentation has been insightful and has left you with some practical tips on how to improve your negotiation skills and approach some of these future negotiations in a more confident and engaged manner. So I have left my LinkedIn profile there, as well as the full-length blog post that I wrote on negotiations. But I will turn it over to Damon quickly, and then we'll open it up for a quick Q&A.
Thank you so much, Pascal, for that. I think you and I have had plenty of conversations in the past, and every time that we engage in conversations, I always think, okay, there's so much more I need to know. And I feel like we had 60 minutes today. We could have extended it for longer. So thankful for that knowledge that you have essentially enlightened us today with. I know for me, every time I hear the statistics, I realize the amount of barriers that we as women really do have to come up against for something as simple as negotiating. I say it's simple, but I know for others it's not. So thank you for giving us those tips. And I encourage people to look at the statistics not as a barrier or not as a deterrent to ask for what you're worth, but to motivate you to say, this is what I'm worth. And I love that BATNA piece. So thank you once again. And I do encourage anyone to reach out to Pascal on LinkedIn. He is very interactive on that forum. And I personally know that he would love to assist you. We do not have that much time, but I'll pass it back to you, Pascal. I don't know if you want to jump into the comment section just to answer as many questions as we can in the next 6 minutes.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess the first thing is just there were a few other people that had responded to that question when I paused a little bit earlier on. So lots of similar experiences to what you had shared, Damon, and what Michaela had shared as well. So that checks out there. There's one question here from a LinkedIn user. When thinking about what's at stake for both sides, particularly in the nonprofit space, where budgets are tight, I would assume that a job offer is made once a nonprofit has assessed what it can already afford. So that seems to make it even more difficult to raise the prospect of negotiating salary, particularly as this takes money away from program delivery and those who need assistance. What are your thoughts on that? That's a valid point. I definitely see where you're coming from, but I think my perspective on this is that regardless of the industry or of the organization, what that specific organization does, there should always be room to have that discussion. If there's not room to have that discussion or to raise that subject, it's not an equitable environment, regardless, again, of whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit private business or a publicly traded business, whatever it may be. That's kind of my view on the subject. In order to create an equitable environment, there always needs to be a safe space to have that discussion. That doesn't mean, again, that you're going to get exactly what you're asking for, or that they might be able to stretch quite as far maybe as a for-profit business might. But again, in my opinion, there has to be a safe and comfortable space fostered to at least bring that up and have that discussion and ask the questions. And who knows, they might tell you exactly what you're suspecting already, but at least there needs to be, I think, a willingness and a space to have that discussion, have that conversation, ask those questions, and really obtain that information from the other side. And again, just related to the points I was mentioning on my last couple of slides, there's a lot more at stake in a job offer negotiation than just the base salary as well. So you can think about all of those other things that I mentioned, whether it's vacation entitlement or flexible schedules or your title or your start date. Like, there's all sorts of different things, learning and development budget, the access to the tools that you have or need to do your job. There's all sorts of other things that might not make the organization stretch as far financially as they might need to for a higher base salary, but that can still help bridge that gap or get you a little bit closer to what you're thinking or wanting. So hopefully that's somewhat helpful.
Sorry, Pascal, I do have one quick question.
Mm-hmm.
This might take us to the end of the session. I'm not too sure. But you did note that there needs to be essentially kind of like a shift in thinking from the business perspective, from the manager, and possibly from the HR sector. So I'm not in the HR sector. I have no idea how it works. How would we go about creating change in that HR sector? Is that something that's on us? Is it that it's a higher level within the HR realm? What can we do? And I don't know if you even know that response, but
Mhm.
what can we do to kind of create change or just at least create awareness in that specific sector? Hey, this is what's going on.
Yeah, great question. So I think to sort of clarify what I was saying there is I think there already are quite a few HR people and recruiters and even like hiring leaders in the businesses that are striving and pushing for this more equitable environment. But in my experience in some of my past organizations and just in general, I think on my knowledge of the industry, I think where folks like myself and others that are passionate about this sometimes run up against a wall is at those higher levels of the organization. Sometimes it might be with like the VP of HR, but oftentimes they want to push these things as well, and then they're running up a wall against the CEO or the COO or the CFO that are maybe not as concerned about some of these things or don't see the importance or the value of some of these things and are more concerned again about the dollars and cents and things like that. So I do think it's a part of it is going to be, as sad as this is, like a part of it is the passing of time and kind of new generations, more millennials, more Gen Z folks rising up into positions of power and decision making in the business world and in different organizations. So I think that's number one. And number two is really, as you said, just continuing to create awareness, like having more and more of these types of webinars and events, conferences that are focused around diversity and inclusion, inviting not only the diversity and inclusion and HR professionals to those conferences, but trying to invite or push those CEOs and CFOs and COOs to attend those conferences as well and learn about that and see the data and everything like that. And I just think, honestly, one of the most powerful things for me anyways, as a Caucasian male, is like hearing the stories and the anecdotes of people that are different than myself. And that's why I mean, in a way, I've been fortunate because in my job, I've been exposed to, again, 7,500 plus people of all different backgrounds and walks of life and genders and ethnicities and cultures. So I think I've been lucky in my position to get an understanding and a picture firsthand of all those differences in experience and in negotiations and in how people are treated in interviews and everything like that. So I think it's really, again, just like, I guess, shouting it from the rooftops, like sharing each of you, like any women or any people of color, anyone that feels that they may have experienced some of these kind of discriminatory negotiation practices or things like that in the past, like share those stories publicly, share them on your LinkedIn, share them, write a blog about it, make a YouTube video, talk to people in your network or in the business community or in the nonprofit community. I think really it's just a matter of getting the word out there. And because at the end of the day, we're all human, and I would like to think that most humans are good natured and in general and want fair and equitable outcomes. So I think at the end of the day, like, some people just need to hear that firsthand or sometimes multiple times before they get the picture. So I think from the candidate side or from the YW side, like that's what I would say, is just continue hosting these kinds of events, continue fostering conversation around it, continue sharing those stories, and hopefully that will continue to kind of trickle out to a wider scale as well.
Okay. Thank you, Pascal. This has been absolutely great. For someone who does not represent that marginalized, the typical marginalized sector for the demographic that has to really fight for negotiations, really appreciate you advocating for that marginalized sector. So thank you for your work. Thank you for doing this today. The takeaway I think from this is, yes, there are barriers, but we have the tools to fight those barriers and pretty much try our best to empower our own lives. So, one thing I do want to comment, I know there was some technical issues for some of the individuals that may have missed a portion of this presentation. Just know that it is recorded and we will be uploading it onto our website at a later date. So just look out for that. And I want to thank everyone for connecting with us today and spending the last hour and some minutes listening and on this important topic. Thank you once again, Pascal. And for everyone out there, just feel empowered. Go reach for those goals, go after what you know you are worth. And on behalf of YW Calgary, have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.